Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the GeoInterview. I am Anmol, your host, and we were very delighted to welcome Miss Katherine Hadda, who is the visiting fellow at the CSIS Chair in US India Policy Studies. Miss Hadda, it is truly an honor to have you here with us. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm fine, Anmol, and it's a pleasure to be with you too. And congratulations to you for getting that mouthful of my title just perfect. So it's a little hard to say something.
Glad to hear that, Ms. Hadda, and really excited for the discussion that is going to follow. So just to tell the audience a bit more about you, Ms. Hadda is a distinguished diplomat who most recently served as the US Consul General in Hyderabad, India, where she was impressive in advocating for US strategic interests in the country. Her prior diplomatic roles also include advising on economic stability issues in Rome, strengthening counterterrorism efforts in London, and overseeing billions of dollars of economic assistance to Afghanistan. So, Ms. Hadda, to start off and to address the most important area of concern here, how do you perceive the current state of US-India relations? And what are the key areas where you see the most potential for growth and cooperation?
Well, thank you, Amol, again. I don't want to correct. I am no longer a U.S. diplomat, just that clear. I retired after about a 32-year career in 2019, but I still very much care about our foreign policy and about U.S.-India relations. And I'm happy to say, in my view, they're going very, very well. I think our cooperation when I was in Hyderabad from 2016 to 2019 was excellent. I think it's only stronger now. So we really talk about huge ranges of issues between our governments, some of which make the news and some of which don't. So obviously our growing defense relationship, which we'll talk about a little more later, is always front and center. But we cooperate also on climate change, on space, on high technology, and then in some of the softer issues, economics, health. So really, if you name an issue, there's a dialogue that we're having about it. And I think it's fair to say also that our strategic alignment in a lot of these areas is growing. I would say one of the things that is the most positive about the US-India relationship right now is that it is no longer the case, as I think it used to be the case, that a disagreement might scuttle relations in other areas. You know, they would spill beyond what the actual disagreement was. And I'm thinking, for example, the disagreements that we had over the U.S. handling of the Cobra Gotti case several years ago. But now we have actually rather significant disagreements, for example, on Russia and Ukraine. And yet our cooperation continues not only in areas unrelated, such as health, but in areas that are related, such as defense and security. So I think all that is very positive. I'm not sure we have the level of automaticity I would like to see in our relationship, that we know that when you're president of a company or whatever you want to be doing in 20 years, we'll still have this level of connectedness, but I think we will. Including because of our very strong people-to-people relationship, which is definitely a driver of ties.
You brought up some very interesting points there. You talked about defense, you talked about technology. You also talked about disagreements, but we'll come to that later. So I just want to shift the attention towards trade here. In your experience as a diplomat, what have been the most significant challenges and opportunities to enhance bilateral trade between the two nations?
Well, you know, I think it always helps to have shared objectives and a shared vision. And I believe that's why when you see areas in which the world has given us those shared objectives, China's malign behavior in the region, and in the world, you know, that has given us probably our best framework for economic cooperation. If you're talking supply chain resilience, the ICET talks on advanced technologies. Pandemic preparedness was another example, not only that COVID gave us the example that we need to prepare for these kind of global health emergencies, but that we recognized, we and other partners have recognized an overdependence on China, not only for the health information, which we didn't get, but for the pharmaceutical inputs. You know, you're such a pharmaceutical manufacturing powerhouse, and yet a lot of your APIs, your inputs, come from China. So those areas, I think, have seen the biggest progress. I think what we're still lacking, though, to be frank, is a sort of overarching economic vision. And to some extent, we're a bit in conflict in some areas. For example, we both want to build up domestic manufacturing. That's not necessarily a conflict, but it just means that's where our priorities are. And so, and in our country, I think there's a barrier. Both parties, neither party really favors a lot of trade agreement negotiations at the moment for domestic political reasons. But so I think those are the areas, you know, we have to think of an overarching vision. And I would suggest Viksit Bharat might be such a vision. You know, if India wants to be a developed country economy by 2047, which we certainly support, what will it take and how can we work together to help India meet that goal? Recognizing that India is in the driver's seat. India has to make those decisions, but how can we play into that?
Right. So you mentioned we need a comprehensive economic framework. And we also know how uncertain today's global order is. So when we talk about working in a global order that is very uncertain, where there are economic uncertainties and challenges, what specific strategies do you think both India and the US need to adopt to promote economic resilience and growth between them?
Well, I think it's a very good question. I think I've touched on a little bit of it. You know, our supply chain talks, our ISET talks. India did not join the trade element of IPEF, but the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework that the Biden administration had put forward, you know, all those things are very useful. But believe it or not, because I am an economic diplomat, really, for most of my career, I would say that what a country does domestically is as important or perhaps more important to developing economic resilience, both for one's own economy and in terms of economic relations with other countries. So, for example, India's PLI initiative to attract investment in certain sectors, that's very good. But there are other areas that are maybe broader. I would encourage you and your viewers to look at the CSIS economic reform scorecard that was just updated for India, because it mentions what a wide number of Indian and American businesses say would be helpful reforms to encourage trade and investment. And so, for example, if you increase foreign direct investment in retail, which was on the list, you know, I would argue that that helps trade as well and exports, because it can help put India into the global supply chain in areas that India, you know, it aspires to be part of the global supply chain. So many of the domestic reforms are actually very important for our bilateral relations as well.
Right. So while we speak of global uncertainties and how both the nations need to do well to build economic resilience between them, let's shed some light on the importance of defense ties in this aspect. Could you share some insights on the evolving defense cooperation between the US and India and how this partnership basically contributes to regional and global security?
I'd be happy to. Now, of course, there again, China looms as a compelling force, and that perhaps is why you see our defense and security relationship is maybe a little bit ahead of our economic and trade relationship, although both are important. We recognize China and its malign behavior can be a regional threat. It also can be a global threat when we're talking about advanced technology. So I think a lot of our defense ties are aimed at that. So the Quad, for example, the partnership between India, the United States, Australia, and Japan, it's not technically speaking a defense organization, but it has sort of defense elements built in. And then we see a lot, for example, there's Malabar, this big naval exercise has been going on for a while. And the message really is we want to keep a free and fair and open Pacific, not only for us, but for our regional partners, Pacific Islands, Southeast Asia. And I think India's also helped the United States see the importance of the Indian Ocean to maintaining, economic stability and security, and political security as well. I think it's very significant, by the way, the United States moved from referring to the Pacific area of command to the Indo-Pacific. We recognize the important role that India has in these areas. In addition to these really major exercises that get a lot of attention, there's a whole range of smaller things that happen between our countries on defense that may not make the news. So when I was in Hyderabad, we had at least 2 ship visits by US naval ships to the Eastern Naval Command in Vizag. And those were important. They did do exercises as well, but again, the bonding that goes on between our militaries and with the broader Indian community, we had our sailors play games with orphans in the city of Vizag. It builds a lot of support and goodwill for the relationship. The last thing I would say is I think it's very productive that we're getting an expanded view of what security really means. And it can mean more than weapons. So for example, we have now the Indo-Pacific framework this under the Quad. It's an Indo-Pacific partnership on enhanced maritime domain awareness. And that we pool commercial satellite data and help ourselves plus other partners, again, in the Pacific Islands or the Southeast Asia, identify threats such as trafficking. They respond to disasters, natural disasters. So those things are also extremely important when we talk about defense and security.
Right. So you very rightly mentioned that India and the US are cooperating very well on defense and security issues. They're also looking to enhance this partnership. But you also briefly mentioned before that there are areas of where they converge as well. So could you shed some light on these aspects and tell us more about how can they work together to promote bilateral and multilateral cooperation in these areas?
Sure. I think I'll just talk about what we are doing because it's all very positive and there's quite a lot of it. I think I touched a bit on the bilateral relationship, how expansive it is, also on the Quad. I'd give you as another example, the G20, where India just did a great job, leading the G20 in a number of sectors. So things that might not have gotten a lot of attention in the news, but we watched very closely at CSIS was, for example, what we did on health in that forum, where India and we cooperated, for example, on building a digital health platform that could be used, among the G20 nations. In general, we really celebrate India's role as a global South leader and interlocutor. We think it's very helpful for the world. On the margins of the G20, we announced the Mideast Europe-Indian Economic Corridor. I think that's been waylaid a bit because of what's going on between Israel and Gaza, but I have no doubt it will come back and will be very helpful to numerous countries, both in those countries and around the world, to have alternate supply routes and development growing to connect these countries. So those are just a few other areas that we cooperate very well.
Right. So now just to talk in a very general sense and to draw upon your extensive diplomatic experience, what would be some of the key strategies for navigating and strengthening diplomatic relationships, in particular when we speak about different geopolitical contexts?
It's a very good question, and I've been thinking about that quite a lot recently. I think the biggest thing is to really identify areas of convergence and to have the political will and the attention span to really build on those. So, for example, right now, I mentioned health. You look at climate and clean energy, the work that we're doing together on clean energy. So it helps, as I said, when you have a vision and a framework and you know what you're working on. One thing I really want to point out is that it can be helpful even if we don't agree on everything. So I just mentioned that we celebrate India's role as a global South leader, and we do. And there may be some countries that don't really trust the word of the United States, but trust the word of India. So where we have an issue in common, in cases like that, it might be helpful to have India be the interlocutor with those countries and not with us. So because India has credibility through its foreign policy strategic autonomy that we might not have. I think engagement is just sustained engagement is extremely important in building diplomatic success, so that you don't only call each other when you have a crisis or an immediate need, but you've built up a foundation of teamwork and trust. And in this, I am vehemently opposed to people who talk about the need for a transactional foreign policy. I think it's a failure when that happens. I think that's what we have in the United States with Saudi Arabia, for example, which can be very important and productive, but in many ways is not built on a shared set of values. So it's a bit brittle. Our relationship with China has become very transactional, and you can see what that can do. So I think it's in our interest as two like-minded democracies with a lot of shared interests in the world to find areas of convergence that aren't in the front and center of the news. And so as the Consul General in Hyderabad, for example, our consulate, which wasn't just me, it was full of a lot of very skilled US diplomats and local employees who helped us navigate the relationship. But we led relations with 3 states, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and Odisha. And the population of those states, is bigger than, it's twice Italy, right? So it's very, very important. And we had a lot of special projects and sustained engagements locally that definitely help boost the US India relationship. So, that would include our consular work, obviously, visas, support for American citizens, many of whom were children, actually, born in the United States. And also, public affairs work promoting cultural exchanges, educational exchanges, so that we increased bilateral understanding between our countries. Helping health issues, again, we have a very long relationship working together to counter tuberculosis, which spreads across borders. So when you're helping India or any other country address tuberculosis, you're helping every country address tuberculosis. So really, the list is kind of long about the importance of a sustained engagement and the benefits of having that engagement.
I think you very rightly mentioned how the engagement needs to be sustained and not just transactional. So having discussed economics, defense, areas of cooperation, and even non-cooperation between the US and India, let's shift the conversation to a lighter note. And as you already mentioned, let's discuss about your time as the US Consul General in Hyderabad. Can you just give us a broad idea of what specific campaigns and programs are carried out by US Consul Generals specifically in India, and how such initiatives help in promoting US strategic interests and fostering mutual understanding between the 2 countries?
Well, I think I touched on a few on educational exchanges, consular work. In addition, for example, in Hyderabad, we had, when I was there, I think it's grown, about 140 US companies. Some were quite small, maybe little software companies, but we also had in Hyderabad the largest campus for Microsoft anywhere outside the United States. And As you likely know, the CEO of Microsoft is a Hyderabadi, Satya Nadella. So is the CEO of Adobe, Shantanu Narayan. So the ties were very strong, but it was a point of pride for us to highlight for ordinary citizens of India the benefits of having this presence, this American commercial presence. And that included on CSR, corporate social responsibility. I was very proud to kind of midwife and see through the first joint CSR project, which was a job skilling program for underserved women, which still exists. And I'm happy to say has expanded to include men, has turned back the original center to the local community in which it was housed for them to run, and has moved on. It's like a startup, which is what it was designed to do. And we had the power to do that by working with our companies. So those are just a few examples of the kinds of things you can do that really help build up that reservoir of partnership between the United States and India. And we were proud to support it.
Thank you, Ms. Hadda, for giving us insights into your extensive diplomatic career and into your work as the US Consulate General. With this, I believe that we have come to the very end of our agenda for today. And I believe that everything that you spoke to us about today contributes positively to promoting a deeper understanding of the relationship between our two countries. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. It was truly a pleasure speaking with you, and we hope to have you with us again very soon. And a big thank you to our audience as well.
Yeah. Thank you to you and your audience and to the whole GeoStrata team. And now the baton is handed to you to build up the US-India relationship. So thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you.